Welcome to the Good and Basic Podcast, a long-form conversation, this time with a special guest, Dr. Shanon Brooks. And we are at the site of Monticello College, and that's actually going to be the topic of the conversation. So, welcome.
Thank you.
And also thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Fantastic. What is Monticello College, and why is it different from a normal university?
Well, I would say it's not different from a normal university in the grand scope of things. If you look at universities from 1636, which was Harvard, up until about beginning of World War II, we're very much like those schools. Since that time, we have diverged.
So you're closer to the ideal or the original form of a university than to what's normal in a university today.
Right. Yeah, up until the beginning of the 20th century, university was not specifically designed for preparing you for employment, for a job. It was more designed about making really good American citizens. And it was only after World War II, the GI Bill, as we moved into the 60s and 70s, that we started really focusing on preparing people for employment.
Right.
Prior to that was not the purpose of higher education.
That's an interesting thing. It's one of the subtexts that is all over the place in college is, what will I do with this major?
Right.
How am I going to get a job with this? Because that's one of the implicit assumptions. Whereas more originally, it's more about leadership and general competence. I mean, people will go and study medicine and not actually be doctors. They'll just have gained from the experience.
Right. Which takes you back to the concept of what was the initial purpose, or what is the purpose of government?
Mm-hmm.
There's two schools of thought. One is protection. The other one is providing security. Those are the two schools of thought for what is the purpose of government today. Originally, from the time that this government started to probably 100 years ago, it was very much the idea of protection of rights, protection of borders, those kinds of things. Beyond that,
kind of a referee model.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Beyond that, it was citizens live your lives. We're going to stay out of it, but it's not our job to provide for you, to ensure that you have whatever you think you need. That model has changed significantly, pretty much 1913 on.
Yeah. It changes massively in the 30s. That's when I read a book recently that was called The Peaceful Revolution, that talked about how certain clauses in the Constitution were radically altered in our understanding of it. In order to allow for these changes, in order to experiment with more social services and such,
right,
which the old form didn't allow.
Right.
One of the things that I find interesting about that referee model is that it puts way more on the individual citizen in terms of regulating themselves,
right,
in order to, provide for themselves, provide their own services, and also to just be competent in general. And there is a nobility in that that I admire, in being able to take care of yourself.
Right. Well, you go back to Jefferson's meritocracy. You go back to Adam Smith's The Invisible Hand. All these things were done without government involvement. These were, if you want to make your way in life, you want to do well in life, do well.
Yeah.
It's not what government gives you. It's not what handouts can I get. What legs up can I get? It's understand what I want, understand what I need, and then move forward on that basis and put the hard work in.
Which requires way more competence at the level of the
Yes.
individual. You need to know how to go out into the wilderness and carve out a homestead and then turn it into, something successful.
Well, and competence for sure, but let's go a more foundational layer. Consciousness. Consciousness of who you are, what is around you, and what competencies you need to have to accomplish what you want, and then do it. I often share the story, and I'll abbreviate it, but of a gentleman from North Korea who came to America, and he got a job washing dishes in a restaurant. And he asked if he could sleep in this little closet that they had, and they felt sorry for him, so they let him sleep there. He worked at that place for 5 or 6 years before he raised enough money to figure out how to get his wife over. And then they lived in the closet while they were working in a restaurant. Another 10 years down the road, he purchased the restaurant.
Wow. Okay, so he was saving a lot during that time.
That's right.
Gosh, that takes a level of discipline. I mean, that reminds me of the characters from Dune, the novel by Frank Herbert.
Yeah,
You've got the Fremen who are trying to terraform the planet.
Right.
I mean, their ability to go through self-sacrifice in order to achieve a long-term goal is
Right.
just incredible. And
Right.
today, I mean, Americans in general don't have a retirement plan, have a hard time staying out of debt, constantly living below their means. I mean, it is very common to be, and I don't want the negative stigma attached to this word, but to be
Right.
weak in terms of our ability to withhold from
Right.
ourselves, to regulate ourselves.
Minimal. Yeah.
We don't do it. Maybe we can, but
Right.
in general, we don't.
Right. We don't. We certainly can.
Yeah.
We have the capacity, but we don't. And we don't, I think it's in our nature to do the bare minimum, but I think it's also, we have really developed not, and I don't want to stereotype, millennials, but we have created long before the millennials, this coddling, this government coddling concept. Tocqueville talked about it. He identified the beginnings of this in 1830s, this idea of being taken care of. We
Yeah.
want to be taken care of. We'll sacrifice liberty for security.
Yeah.
And he identified our tendency to do that, Americans' tendency to do that over 100 years ago.
One of the things that I find fascinating about that, and this is where one of the government connections come in, is maybe the government connection doesn't even come in, because you can still be that strong even if the programs are available. I mean, you could just not use them, or you
Right.
could just use them and still retain competence.
Right.
But there is an association between being able to rely more on someone outside of yourself and then not relying on yourself.
Right.
And therefore letting those parts of yourself that would, lift you and let you take over the restaurant, atrophy.
Yeah.
And am I correct in understanding that one of the purposes of this college is to build up the moral character, the drive that allows you to survive really in both worlds?
Yeah. Let's go to the mission of the school.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to recite it for you because it's worth taking the time to do that. The mission of Monticello College is to build men and women. I could stop right there.
To build them.
To build men and women,
Yeah.
right? We have a coddling culture. We have very few real men and real women in our culture today, right? Who do everything that we're talking about here. Real Americans, right? That from our perspective. So to build men and women of virtue, wisdom, diplomacy, and courage, who inspire greatness in others and move the cause of liberty. So if you break that down, that's an essence. I mean, we can stop the interview here. That's who we are. That's what we're about. And a lot of what I just recited there isn't even part of our culture anymore. I mean,
And it's very different from the get a job model of college.
Right.
Which, frankly, I see reasons for that. I mean, you need to eat. So,
Right.
it's kind of nice to have some money to do that with. To buy the food, to pay the mortgage, to do the
well,
stuff. Yeah.
we when he was still alive, and we still adore what he created. Think of Steve Jobs for a moment. When there was a time when people said, "Man, if I could just work for Apple, if I could just work for Microsoft," Bill Gates.
IBM was the classic,
Right.
get the job, stay with the company, be a company man for 30 years.
So look for that greatness and attach yourself.
Yeah.
And the step above that, which is what they all did, was become that greatness,
Yeah.
right? And somehow we missed the boat on that. It's attach yourself to greatness, and then I can rest on my laurels. They're paying the bills, they're covering everything, giving me a salary, happy day. I can watch videos and play golf.
There's a huge amount of security, or at least of consistency. I mean, just where you don't have to worry about a lot of the stuff.
Right.
Somebody else is worrying about it.
And there was a time, we had kind of a golden age in America where you worked 40 years for the same company, got a gold watch and a pension at the end. Those days are gone. They've been gone since the 90s,
Yeah.
right? But we're still teaching that. That's my biggest beef with higher education in America today, is we're teaching a model that hasn't existed for 3 decades.
Yeah.
And there is no security. The security today is in you, your knowledge base, and your ability to anticipate what's coming with these changes that are happening faster and faster and faster.
And on a practical level, that looks like being able to work as a freelancer, together with the
Yes.
personal discipline that would
Right.
take, or as an independent contractor, or as an entrepreneur starting a business. Maybe
Right.
it's small, maybe it's massive.
That's right.
But you kind of need to make your own way a little bit today. And that's more normal. I mean, I was looking at a statistic that said that the proportion of people working as freelancers or from home as independent people has not ever been higher, I mean,
Right.
in the last 50 years.
Well, that's why you have, there's a small but significant move out there, don't go to college at all. And it's interesting, if you look at the AI world and this whole artificial intelligence that's coming upon us very rapidly right now. A study done just a couple years ago anticipated 47% of the current jobs would be affected or eliminated by AI. What do you think? White collar or blue collar mostly?
White collar is easier to do with pure software.
It is.
Although it depends. I mean, my background is in law, and that's a huge discussion right now, is to say, how is AI going to affect the practice of law? And I mean, already there's things like LegalZoom, or my case, that are making it way easier. Discovery software is one of the big ones, where it's combing through files to find the stuff that's relevant to help build your case for you, instead of combing through truckloads of paper yourself, which means a lot of what junior associates were doing at very large law firms is now automated.
Right.
And that trend is only going to continue. Eventually, I mean, there are some things that you really want humans doing. I mean, client interaction, or maybe negotiating with the judge, and you probably don't want a computer as your judge. That's creepy.
It is creepy.
But China's already been doing it, by the way. Although their conviction rate is over 99%, and so I don't know that the judge really needs to be a human.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, you look at that, and there's a lot of the verbs of being a lawyer that can just go poof with a few lines of software after we get a little more clever.
Frontline in November of last year put out a program, so it's a month and a half old, on AI, a 2-hour special, and really covered a lot of this, or where this is going and how fast it's happening. And one example they showed was a truck driver.
Yeah.
40 years ago, that was the way it placed to be. $100,000 a year, easy, and it was regulated. And 40 years ago, they deregulated it. So now they've have a lot more truck drivers. The income's going down, but it's still solid to be there. And
it's still one of the places where you can get a really decent income with a high school diploma.
Except that it's being taken over rapidly. There is a company now called Embark that is actually moving freight for real with driverless trucks in the south, down in Arizona area, and so they talked to these truck drivers, and the truck drivers were certain they would never replace a driver. And then the reporter explained to them that it was being done, and you could just look, the look on their face was, wow. See, that's part of the thing we're talking about. If you're aware of this, the idea of having driverless vehicles is not a new idea. It's been around. They've been talking about it for at least 15, 20 years.
Yep.
If you are watching that and paying attention, you would have morphed out of that into something else that would be more contiguous with AI is doing. But that's not what happened. And they're comparing AI to especially the British Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And people didn't see that coming. Well, they could have seen it coming if they had been paying attention, but they weren't. They were happy with their lives, and they were in this little bubble. And that's one of the things that, for all young people, college age, that we're trying to communicate here is pay attention. Look out there. Anticipate change. It is coming.
That's one of the things that is really interesting about this model of education, the model where it's all about building men and women.
Right.
I mean, building their competence to, have your eyes wide open and take advantage of opportunities, and to be the prime mover of your own destiny.
Right.
But one of the compelling cases that you could make to say why you need to build yourself is, all these disasters on the horizon, right? The doom and gloom.
Right.
And those are good reasons. I mean, the amount of chaos in the world, if there's more uncertainty, then you need to rely a little bit more on yourself to keep your eyes open. But it's valuable even if things were to stay exactly the same. Let's say IBM is still a 9-to-5 that you can get for 40 years and retire with the gold watch, which it isn't. But even assuming that was the case, why would it still be good to have a build yourself education?
Well, and see, that's the thing we're teaching. Everything we're teaching here, we're actually perpetuating a new economy and a new lifestyle here. That's what we're promoting. It doesn't matter if things go to hell in a handbasket or if they stay the same. It's a really high quality of life.
Yeah.
Growing your own food, building your own homes, producing your own electricity, solving your situation, solving your problems instead of relying on other people or governments to do it. It's a really high quality of life.
That's related to the homesteading movement.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
How tied in to the homesteading movement is the college campus?
It's not at the moment, but we are working with some individuals. I don't want to go into too much detail, but trying to resurrect some homesteading laws in various states, and then working through that, finding ways to get land to our graduates so they can get over that hurdle. every student that graduates from here, or students that I talk to, they're considering coming here. Great, it's a great model. How do I get the land?
Yeah.
Right. And there's other ways. Joel Salatin, for example, in his book Fields of Farmers,
Okay.
talks about farmers in the Midwest who will not give their farms to their children because their children want to sell them and turn them into subdivisions. They're looking for couples who will come out and promise to farm this at least their life and hopefully get their kids to farm too. They want it to stay in food production.
Yeah.
And so there
And
are
that's
ways.
because it's not just about the money. I mean,
Right.
you get a quick return if you turn it into a
Right.
subdivision.
It's a lifestyle.
But
Yep.
there's some value in the lifestyle. They want that itself to be promoted,
That's
not
right.
just for themselves, but for others.
We were talking about this recently, but this idea of purpose, right? And I've written some articles on my blog. I don't know if you want to plug, if you want
Yeah,
me to,
absolutely.
to plug my
Check out
stuff.
Shannon's blog.
ShannonBrooks.com. There's an article in there that talks about the idea of what we've done, how we've been so innovative in this country that we've come up with all kinds of ways to save time. What are we doing with that saved time? Are we helping the poor? Are we innovative? Are we being creative? Are we helping solve problems in the world?
Do we even feel satisfied?
Right. Or are we just watching videos?
Yeah.
Are we just getting unhealthy, sitting on the couch,
Netflix binging.
chipping out? Yeah. If so, if that's what we're doing, which you and I both know, that's what the majority of us are doing, wouldn't we be better off
Making something.
saving less time? Maybe we might be better off washing our own clothes by hand than binging on the couch with Netflix. In terms of
Yeah.
who we are, we might be better off.
I'm not entirely sure about that because even with the modern washing machine, laundry is a bit of a drag. But one of the things that I get a lot of satisfaction out of is using my hands to make things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something where, is it about the economic output of what I'm making? Is it really that I'm going to be using this stuff? I mean, not really.
Right.
It's more about growing. I mean, for lack of a better word, there's some value in the human growth itself. And then also, I mean, there's some security in knowing that I can make this. So being able to do some very, very low quality blacksmithing, but able to do it in a very fundamental way where I'm able to make my own iron.
But
Yeah, I could do that.
But most people may not blacksmith, but they do
Yeah.
eat food, right?
Yeah.
And we were talking last night at lunch, or yesterday at lunch, with Josh Choate, who teaches here as well.
He teaches the permaculture design classes.
Yeah. About the idea of canning food, and I don't remember if it was you or him that came up with this. Guy was really frustrated. His wife was canning.
Borsodi, Ralph
Yeah,
Borsodi.
yeah. We can go down and just buy it, and he analyzed it, and it turned out that you could actually do it cheaper by canning at home.
He was out competing. So his wife was canning fruit, and he said, "Well, honey, that's great, but does it really pay?" And so then he was kind of obsessive, and he
Right.
kept track of how much they were spending on gas and what the rate for labor was, and like literally every little detail, and found out that they were out competing the Campbell Soup Company for a comparable quality of canned tomatoes, which blew his mind. I mean, he came up with a theory that as production costs went down due to mass production, your distribution and warehousing costs went up,
Right.
because you needed more managers
Right.
and more middlemen. And so eventually there was a sweet spot where you could compete reasonably on a home manufacturing level.
And not only that, the sense of purpose.
And also the flavor. I mean, he's not making the
Yeah,
cheapest
right,
tomatoes.
Right.
He's making the fresh stuff.
It's quality stuff, sense of purpose, you save money. Now, it's that or Netflix binge, right? And
Yep.
But we've lost that. I grew up canning. When I was a kid, we had a half-acre garden, and we canned tons of stuff. We dried things, we canned things. We have done that with my kids, but not as much, right? Most people my age never experienced that. It's more of my grandparents' thing to do. I just happen to grow up on a farm. So we've lost that,
Yeah.
you know. We've lost, I worked on a dairy as well in the summer times, and the relationship we had, it was whole milk. It was long before, it was back in the 70s, long before all this nonsense we have now. But by the way, just for your viewers, we have a lot of people have grown up on whole milk.
Without dying.
Without dying, without getting sick.
Okay.
Actually improving in health. Just saying. And the relationship we had with our customers who would come, would bring their own containers, we'd fill up and all that. And he sold out a few decades ago because he can make more money doing topsoil, and he lost all that connection. There are things beyond just making the money, right? That the person who's running it loses that. They know they've lost it, but their kids don't know the difference, and so they have no concept of this idea of purpose, of mission, this idea
of connection. I mean, one
right.
of the things
Community,
with
right?
With the milk business, I mean, is you're connected not only with the material and with the milking, but
right.
also with your customer base,
right.
where you know them on a first name basis.
Right.
I mean, that's largely gone. I mean, we're moving to Amazon stores where you don't even see another human as you walk out.
Right. There's no cashier. There's no interaction. There's nothing. So
it's an introvert's dream, but maybe there's something lacking there.
Well, in terms of community, in terms of having a country, in terms of patriotism, I think there is.
To foster enough community to stay stable as a society in general. I mean, this would apply anywhere.
Right.
This college campus is located in America, and so we focus on Americans, and the idea of an American identity. But the principles apply.
It pertains to humans, right?
Yeah, humans. Yeah. Humans living in groups.
And it turns out we know through history as recent as 2 weeks ago, because there are people coming from other countries, North Korea, all the time, right? People have a desire, a thirst for liberty. It's unfortunate that there are human beings that have to live off of grass harvested from the fields by hand and are starving before they get enough gumption to leave. Because if you get caught leaving North Korea,
you're dead.
You're dead. They shoot you, execute you on the spot or in the city square. And by the way, public execution is a big thing in North Korea. Yeah. You have to go, you're forced to go watch these executions.
And so you know very well what's going to happen.
Right. So,
and then escaping into China is as worse,
can be. The human trafficking side of it.
Almost as bad as dying.
So this idea that we're talking about is not an American concept. But yes, I'm doing America. I've got my book, and we'll show that later. But this is a human desire. Yeah. This concept of liberty is a human desire.
Determination.
Self-determination, self-fulfillment. Right.
You are the master of your own destiny. I mean, there's always limitations to that. The weather. I mean, farmers have to deal with the weather. But you are the one who is choosing the opportunities. You are choosing the paths to go down.
Right.
And that's a really interesting thing. There's an interesting relationship between opportunities. They have to be out there. You need to have some opportunities to get started, and then once you have started on that path, I mean, you are the one who's at the wheel of your own ship. You are master of your soul.
Sure. Yep, that's right. So that's what we're about, really, is creating an environment. Kind of gives a break. We're not anti-technology here. We're
anti-dependence on technology.
Yeah. We're limited access to technology, right?
Okay.
We people use it for everything, but it's not a lifestyle. It's a tool. And we're trying to create a space for them to learn that, because the kids coming here have had, there've been cell phones their whole life. Mm-hmm. There have been devices, there have been internet. They don't know any different.
And so being able to, I mean, we're off grid here.
Right.
And so being able to turn off the power and say, okay, no internet today. That's a thing that you could do just to prove that, you can survive.
Right. Or limit it, right? We get up before the sun here. We have a thing called sunrise solitude. We get up before the sun, so it's really tough for a kid to get up before the sun and have a happy face when he's been binging on videos till 3 o'clock in the morning.
Sure.
So we shut off the internet at about 10, right? Turn it back on about 5. If you want to get up before the sun and study for a while and use the internet and write your paper, knock yourself out. But we're trying, and it's not to limiting, it's to create an environment so they go, oh, there's some contrast here. Over there, I have unlimited access and I don't have any discipline, so I just binge until my body collapses. Here, there's some discipline. Oh, I can live without that.
Yeah.
Oh, in fact, it's actually better without it most of the time. It's not a lifestyle now. It becomes just a tool.
Yeah.
But you have to create a space for that to happen.
Where you rule the tool rather than the tool ruling you.
That's right. Yep.
So this is the goal. The goal is to have people who are more free. Is that a correct characterization?
Well, yeah, we like to use the term liberty.
Okay.
Liberty pertains more to the individual. Freedom is more of a community concept.
Okay.
So yes, to recognize liberty and to create an environment where they create a mentality as they leave here that, one, I know what it is, I value it, and I can perpetuate it.
Okay.
Right? But you can't do that unless you're doing a bunch of things for yourself. right?
Yeah.
If your dream of getting food and having food stocked up in your house is going to Costco, then there's something missing in this picture. But like here, if we have meat on campus, and we do, we're not anti-meat, but we grow it and we have to slaughter and butcher whatever we eat in terms of meat.
Which means you understand exactly what that meat is when
Exactly.
it reaches the table.
Yeah. And from as the kids rotate in chores and things, you've raised that.
Yeah.
And there's a level of sacrifice, there's a level of gratitude, there's a level of appreciation.
And also probably moderation, I'd imagine.
Absolutely, because slaughtering and butchering is not an easy chore.
Yeah.
And so we're plant-based
Okay.
with meat on occasion as we go procure it. Whether it's hunting or whether it's raising livestock like we do, so that we have that appreciation. It is taking another life. We don't take that lightly. There's no joking and laughing when this is going on. I tend to sit the kids down for a second and talk about the fact that we are going to take a life here and why we're doing it. And they're very receptive to this.
Yeah.
And most of the kids who say they want nothing to do with it, always to a student end up getting involved and learning and growing from the experience.
That's something that would benefit you even if you, I mean, let's say that you had this education, 4 years, you've slaughtered a couple of goats and,
Right.
and learned the whole process and you know where your meat comes from. I mean, even if you go back to a modern consumer lifestyle living, eating from Costco,
Right.
that's where your food comes from, I don't think you'll ever look at the pallet of chicken the same again.
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't. And the quality, right?
Yeah.
And you compare the two.
You know exactly what's in it because
Right.
you put it in it.
That's right. And it tastes different than what you're getting over there. And all these things, we have to create a space. People say, why are you so in the middle of nowhere? Because we literally are.
Yeah, this is actually some of the darkest skies in the country. If you want to go stargazing,
Yeah.
I was driving down here to visit the campus, and Venus, the planet, was out, and it was so bright. I thought that it was a plane coming down to land, like it was that low. Just wow.
Yeah. No, it's very dark. We operate about 2 miles outside of Monticello, which has maybe 2,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
County is 16,000. So we're very remote out here, Four Corners area, on purpose. High elevation, we're 7,500 feet above sea level, on purpose. We have 4 seasons, very distinct here, all on purpose. We didn't do it just because we get cheap land. We're doing it because we're trying to create a space for these kids who have only grown up, even good share of rural America now, in terms of how they think, are no different than the most urbanized center you can think of.
Yeah.
History shows, and in my book, where is that? We talk a lot about this in the first chapter called Georgics. And there's a huge dichotomy between rural and urban living, and has been since the beginning of this Western civilization.
There's that old, during the ages of the Roman Republic, you talk about that in the first chapter,
Right.
that the highest compliment you could give somebody was to call them a good farmer.
Right.
You're such a good farmer. Yeah, that you've got something right, something fundamentally right in terms of your character and your competence and your ability to manage things and your ability to take care of stuff. And with as many irons in the fire as you will naturally have in a farm, I mean, you've got livestock, you've got the house to maintain, you've got the arable crops, you've got all these things, and so your ability as a manager is pretty high.
Right.
Of your own stuff, to manage one's own stuff.
But if you go back to those guys, okay, there were no tractors. There was no mass distributive system for the goods and services. What was it? It was a life lived almost exclusively independent.
Yeah.
And they said that the quality of these people living independently, right, depending on themselves, maybe their close neighbors, that made them really, really awesome citizens of a republic, not a democracy, right? We have to really distinguish between these two, because every president that I can remember has called this a democracy. We follow a philosophical democratic process in our republic, but we are a republic, and that's very different than a democracy.
Which forces more control down to the lower levels,
Yeah.
where you try to maintain it. There's an old Catholic idea called, what is that idea? The law of, the the word escapes me, but the general principle is that you put as much power and responsibility as low as you
Distributivism.
can. Distributivism, the law of super something, I forget.
Yeah.
Something function.
Yeah.
And basically just, if you can handle it with a larger unit, the same issue, or with a smaller unit, and even if you could technically handle it a little better with the bigger unit, a little more controlled, you push it down as a matter of moral principle that the smallest unit that can handle the problem handles the problem. And naturally, some problems have to be handled by larger units. I mean, the military probably shouldn't be county-based; it should probably be more national.
Well, that was the discovery that Jefferson made, right? In his studies with George Wythe. But by the way, preparing for the law to take the bar in Jefferson's day was probably a 6-month process, right?
You sit in the back of some attorney's office, kind of doing an apprenticeship and reading Blackstone as fast as you can.
Patrick Henry used to brag that he did it in 6 weeks. He probably did. Jefferson, his was pushing 4 years.
Okay.
Why? Well, he went to Wythe and said, "You're the #1 attorney in Virginia. Would you mentor me?" He said, "Yes, under one condition. You can't leave until I tell you you can leave."
Okay.
So Jefferson now, 6 or 7 languages. He's got this library in his head, and he went to Wythe and said, "Hey, I'm so grateful. It's been great, but can I go?" And Wythe took out a piece of paper, wrote something down on it, handed it to Jefferson. Remember, he's already got 7 languages. Couldn't read it. It was Anglo-Saxon.
Okay.
And he said, "I can't read this." He said, "I know you can't read this. When you can leave." Well, his study of Anglo-Saxon and his background, by the way, Jefferson did believe in Christ. It's all in his records. Go read his own stuff. So he had an understanding of the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. He's reading Anglo-Saxon and, of course, getting into the history. There is a strong correlation between the ancient Israelites and the Anglo-Saxons.
There's some principles there.
Right? And one of those principles was captains of 10. The idea of you have one guy over 10 families, lowest level,
Okay.
local government. Then the next division was 50 families. Next division was 100 families. Next division was 1,000 families, and so on.
And so anything you can't handle with the 10, you take to the 50.
That's right.
And it doesn't make it all the way up the chain of command.
Right. And here's the key point that you were making. If the 10 comes to the 50 and says, "I need help," he says, "Have you done everything you possibly can?" "No." "Okay, go back. Keep working on it until you cannot resolve it beyond it."
Which pushes the level of responsibility in the general direction of the individual.
That's right. That's right.
And granted, there's some things that you can't handle as an individual, which is why you have the structure of the 10 and the 50 and
That's
so on.
right. Yeah.
But I think there's some real value in that autonomy. I find the title of your book really funny. It's American. It's talking about this the history where we originally started as a country with kind of the Jeffersonian ideal of a bunch of small farms.
Right.
And then we've generally lost that. But I almost think that it would be better if the word killing the American dream were replaced with reviving the American dream, because that seems to be what you're actually on.
Right, but that's not what the book's about. The
Okay.
book is about everything, how we live today. Almost everything is killing the American dream.
Okay.
So here's where we are. We're killing the American dream. We all say the American dream, we want that.
Is independence and even material prosperity.
Right.
It's material prosperity on your own terms.
But the way we're living is actually doing the opposite. So what we're saying is, hey, wake up. Stop killing the American dream. Start living it again. Start building it again. But you can't do that until you realize and recognize that what you're doing is the opposite.
Which just takes some responsibility.
Right. Which goes back to how we started this conversation.
Yeah. Gosh. The responsibility focus is just really interesting. I'd like to talk for a minute about, we've talked a little bit about the Georgics side. Georgics is a term that you use in the book to describe basically farming done right.
Right.
In a nutshell.
Yeah.
It's. Would you mind describing the term?
Yeah, Georgics, and I should probably mention you can get this book. You can't get it on Amazon. You can get it on our website, monticellocollege.org.
Yep.
Right. Georgics is an interesting term that comes from way back the beginning of Western civilization. And
the root is geo, meaning earth,
Right.
like in
Geo.
geology or
Right.
geography. And it is a term used by Virgil in a book called Georgics
Right.
about proper farming.
it's got both Latin and Greek origins to the same thing.
Okay.
Working the earth. It literally means to work the earth. Now, there's an entrepreneurial component to that, obviously, right? But back in the early days when I was with another institution, we would argue over this all the time. And there was 2 guys arguing, me and another guy. He grew up in a city, I grew up on a farm. And as I'm reading it, I'm going, oh, this is the lifestyle I just lived, working the earth, being dependent on the earth, pulling my livelihood from there. Well, he didn't have that background, so he interpreted it to mean entrepreneurship. Well, yes, that's a component, but work the earth, pull the food you eat out of the earth. There's something to that, right?
Yeah.
And we've lost that completely.
So you can't abstract it. I mean, the principles of the principles of Georgic living. I mean, you can partially abstract them up to general entrepreneurship, but it's not general entrepreneurship. There is something specific about being rooted.
It's like nutritionalism,
Okay.
right? I can take an apple and break it down to its 15 or 20 component parts, and then I take those and mix them up in a drink and drink it. And that's no different. It's exactly the same as an apple, except it's not. There's something about the synergy of those things within the apple, that the life and living that's still in the apple, that this powder will never have.
There's a difference between the apple that you just picked that's still warm from the sunshine and the apple that's in the grocery store, which incidentally has been
Right.
bred to have a good shelf life.
Right. And there's a difference between that long shelf life apple and the powder.
Yeah.
Right. And so you take the one that you just picked off the tree and the powder, and there's comparison, right? But it's not the same. Right.
Yeah.
And you can say this powder all day long. You can say nutritionalism all day long, but there is no comparison in terms of what it does for your body.
In quality.
In
I'm
quality.
going to use a term from
Yep.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance,
Yep.
despite my feelings on that book. But there is quality, a
Yep.
quality distinction. And even if you can't put your foot on exactly where it comes from, you know.
So the Roman Republic lasted, depending who you're talking to, somewhere between 300 and 500 years. Then you go into the Roman Empire, right? And even though we're into the Roman Empire, it's now a tyrannical form of government versus the republic that we had for the first period. That carries over. You still have a lot of that carrying over, which is
The character of the people stays very consistent. You've got people like, Cato the Elder is kind of the embodiment of this hyper stoicism, this
Yeah.
idea that you must be hyper disciplined as an individual. So even if you're operating within a framework that is an empire, I mean, there was still a cultural movement to bring in that individual responsibility.
Yeah, and you can break it down. The urbanites, those living in urban centers, were much less
Yeah.
that way. Those living out in the rural areas in the countryside were much more that
And
that
partly
way.
out of necessity. I mean, maybe it's the land that's training you to be that way, but in city it's pretty easy to kind of put your heels up and take the grain dole.
Take the grain dole, go into debt, which is the big issue today, right? In
Yeah.
the American culture, almost
Consumer debt.
almost no one has no debt. Almost everyone has debt, right?
Yeah.
We've come to, and that flies in the face of the concept of Georgics. Georgics is you do with what you have, and if you want more, you put the extra effort in and you make it happen. But you don't borrow, you don't go into debt, you don't do those things. That's slavery. No matter how you slice it, it's slavery.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, in slavery, and one of the things that we need to mention is that the force. Well, I'll make that point in just a moment. But the slavery versus debt. In debt, you have obligations, legal obligations to another person, where you have to pay them, which means that they basically have obligations on your labor.
Right.
So you have to. I mean, if you don't, I mean, there are consequences.
Right.
That you have to do that. And so you are not only dependent on, you have to have income now. You can't just sit in the farm and eat your homegrown vegetables. You need to be making money to pay off the debt.
Right.
But you also have, ongoing obligations which are like slavery. One of the things I'd like to mention about the ancient world is that this tension between, the person who's got their hands in the dirt as kind of an independent farmer versus the, let's say, factory farms. Factory farms were a thing in the ancient world. They just ran on slaves.
Right.
Nowadays we
Right.
have fossil fuels to do that for the most part. But I mean, the same tension of things breaking, where there was a tension between the individual responsibility of the small farm owner who's managing it with his family versus the kind of the mega core, which
Right.
is controlling vast acreages of land and farming it using a top-down bureaucracy and slavery.
Well,
That's a tension that existed then and still exists now.
and let me touch on slavery a little bit, because there's a huge difference between European slavery
Mm-hmm.
and Asiatic or African slavery.
Okay.
Okay, big difference. Most of the slaves of the Western world, so our roots come from Greek and Roman. The Roman had Roman slaves. The Greek had Greek slaves.
Yeah.
These weren't people, 9 out of 10, they were not people that came out of some conflict. It was out of economic necessity. It was this idea, where we get this from is the indentured servant. It was common practice. In fact, up until we got into the middle 1700s in North America, most of the slaves in this country were white. They were indentured servants. We didn't have an explosion of black slavery until the latter part of the 1700s.
And that became an abomination that stuck with us for a
Absolutely.
really long time. And
Absolutely.
It's almost unique. It's not quite unique in history. I mean, slavery's always been nasty. I mean, even in Rome, in Rome there was a practice that you could save your wages, which you made. It was a pittance, but you could save your wages as a slave for 7 years and then pay it to your master, and then say, "Please, may I go now?" I mean, they don't have to give you back, but the practice was that, generally speaking, you would. And then you are free, but, I mean, kind of. You still carry a bunch of social stigmas as an ex-slave, and you still are required legally to work for your former master for a couple days a year, and you're still legally required to, walk in their retinue and sing their praises whenever they ask you to.
We cover all that in here.
Yeah.
It's in here in depth. And that's important to know, because
it's not, I mean, it's better than what we were doing in America, but it's not nice.
Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is it's a reality, right? In the ancient world, without the social safety nets that we have in this country today,
you could sell yourself into slavery.
Many people had to. That was the only way they could feed their family, right? And we could say, well, the government should have stepped up. Well, okay, maybe they should have, but they didn't, right? Sure. In those days, that's a very new phenomena of having these
safety nets.
These safety nets. And so, what do you do in a world where you're not part of a guild? Right? You can't make candles because that is done by these guys, and they'll kill you or run you out of town if you try to.
A cartel, basically.
Exactly. So guilds, how do you make a living? Well, sometimes you're down on your luck, and you find the guy that's got the biggest house, and you say, "I'll live in the shed with my wife, and we eat the scraps off your table if you let me work for you." And the guy says, "Yes, out of pity of my heart, I will bring you in and help you that way." That's a very different idea than we have built up in this country of African slaves. Yeah. African slaves were people that were either kicked out of their communities,
or captured in raiding
parties, captured raiding parties, and then sold off. Right? That's very different than me volunteering to work for you so that I can live, so I can survive.
The raiding component was also pretty strong in the ancient world. I mean, a lot of slaves came from like a city that gets captured, the entire population gets sold into slavery, 10,000 at a time. I mean, one of the major perks of being a soldier in the Roman army in Gaul was, the prospect of capturing a few slaves. But it is interesting that using slavery as a social safety net was a thing that happened in the ancient world.
It was common practice, and it was the vast majority of slaves.
And it was common enough that a number of Roman writers talk about how most senators were descended from slaves.
Right.
I mean, in your family tree, that's probably happened more than once.
Right. And so they're indentured servants.
Yeah.
We lump it all and say there's one kind of slavery. There's actually various kinds. And what we're saying here with what we're trying to do at Monticello College is make us cognizant of that. Because these safety nets are so new, they're also not sustainable, right? Because of these safety nets, we have put ourselves as a nation, whether we know it or not, into trillions. The number varies from 20 trillion to 150 trillion. Do you have any idea how much a trillion is?
I'd rather not think about it.
Once you get about past 2 trillion, it really doesn't make difference how many trillion there is.
Sure.
Which means that those safety nets are vulnerable. We know Social Security, again, we cover all this in the book. We know that Social Security is bankrupt already. It's just being hung on because it's being funded from other places. These safety nets could vanish as fast as they can.
At which point, as a matter of material necessity, you got to take care of yourself. Because if the safety net fails, I mean, you are the thing catching yourself at that point. Right.
And if you have $500,000 worth of debt and you can't make your mortgage payment in 3 months, you're gone.
Yep.
Now where are you going to live?
So I want to talk about this because the word liberal arts comes from this word libertas or liberty or liber.
Yeah.
And this concept is the distinction between a slave. The opposite of a slave is somebody who is liber, somebody who is free, freed man. And I mean, in the ancient world, there's a social stigma attached to being a slave or an ex-slave, and so there's this this difference in character and being and the way you carry yourself and all this stuff that's different about a free person.
Well, and it's a skill set you have, right?
Sure.
People who are free are people who can read.
Okay.
People who are free are people.
And the connection there is between liber, which means the bark of a book, the bark of a tree, which used to use for
Right.
writing.
That's why we use it to explain this, but that's where it came from. So those who are liber, let's use the word. Those who are liber are those who have a very specific skill set. This is why when they taught the liberal arts, about the time of the Renaissance, liberal arts started to come on with a different definition, and that is the humanities.
Okay.
But you have to separate those two out.
A traditional education of, say, the son of a senator in Rome would be very heavy on rhetoric. It's all about how you speak and how you decide. How do you, as a group or as an individual or as the person trying to motivate a decision, how do you? It's decision making in a nutshell. It's decision making and how to get that decision.
And can you lead men? Can you communicate? Do you have and reading, writing, and
studying the classics, which is a mixture of great examples and horrible warnings.
But these are all skills you have to have if you're going to own property.
Sure.
Right? There's very few people owning property who can't read and write.
Okay.
You have to. There's contracts involved. There's obligations involved. There's legal issues involved. And unless you happen to have a lot of extra cash laying around, you can pay people to tell you that. But how do you know they're telling you the right thing?
Yeah.
Right.
In order to have that judgment as an individual, you need to be extremely competent in the written word. Not just can you read your ABCs, but can you read critically? Can you understand?
The federal government came out in 1995 and said that this was the U.S. Department of Education. Said in 1995 that if we continue on the same path that we had been on since the 70s in this country, that by the year 2015, long past, 2015, we would be 50% functionally illiterate. Now, that's significant. One, we surpassed that. When we hit 2015, we were more than 50% functionally illiterate.
And what is the definition of functionally illiterate?
Yeah, illiterate means you can't read and write.
Okay.
Functional literacy means that you can read an ad in a newspaper, 50% off on fruit.
Okay.
But you can't calculate 50%. You don't know what 50% means. It's a comprehension issue,
okay.
right?
So it's more about the concepts than it is about the raw words. I
Right.
can see the words, I know what the words mean, I just can't.
Right. You read a want ad. These are all examples that the U.S. Department of Education actually used from the data that I pulled this from.
Okay.
You can read a want ad in a paper, you just can't understand what they're asking for.
Okay.
So you don't know that you don't know.
And it's hard to make decisions about, do I take this job? Do I buy this fruit?
And what are the long-term ramifications? This also has to do with, deep thinking, high logic, impacts the military. As of 2012, about 40% of those going into specific fields in the military had to have remediation because they couldn't read and write well enough to operate the weapons that they were given. That has national security implications.
Yeah, it does.
And
I mean, you can see that on the national scale, like how this affects organizations.
Right.
Oh gosh, we need to train all the new guys. But it also has implications on the individual level because, I mean, you think about these 50 or 60% who can't make these sorts of long-term decisions or can't make them as well as they could have if that skill set was present.
Right.
And so the two sides of the education here are the liberal arts and the Georgics. And we've talked a fair amount of Georgics. Let's talk a little bit more about the liberal arts.
Sure.
What is it that trains you to be functionally literate, not just at a passable level, not just at I'm no longer functionally illiterate, but at a exceptionally good level?
Well, I would say if you had to boil down to one, it would be the ability to read.
Okay.
Right? That's where the ideas perpetuate.
And how do you learn that?
Lots and lots and lots of reading.
Okay.
And discussions.
And
then writing.
And the discussions are important, I would imagine, because you're testing your ideas, and it brings in that critical element where you're saying, I'm not sure if I believe that, or I'm not sure I understand that, and then testing that against the other people in the group.
Right.
And so maybe they got it and you didn't, and eventually you can all get it.
Right. No, it helps. So reading, writing, and discussion. That's the essence of academics here. And so our students will read anywhere from 30 to 40 books a year. And
this is in 20 weeks, I believe. So it's about 2 books a week.
Yeah, it's 7 months.
400 pages a week, something like that.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. So they spend, they're in class, they have other duties, but they're spending 4 to 6 hours a day studying.
These aren't light books. I mean,
No.
you're reading Euclid, you're reading Herodotus, you're reading the Federalist Papers.
Durant, the story of civilization, the Federalist Papers.
Sure.
By the way, how much time did you spend in law school on the Federalist Papers?
0, actually.
Yeah, interesting. That's a pattern. Almost none of the Ivy League schools even touch them, and almost no law schools in this country today touch the Federalist
Actually,
Papers.
hold on. I took one elective class on the history of constitutional documents, and it was running through major court decisions and basically the history of how we got to now in terms of our constitutional jurisprudence. And in that class, there might have been 1 or 2.
I only bring it up because you're just about finished.
Yeah, just
right
about there.
And so I've been trying to get people to understand this for the last 10 years that we've left that. But those, why? Well, one, they're hard to read.
It wasn't a deep dive, by the way. It would have been a skim on day one. Moving on.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of hard books. And what happens? Amazingly, their capacity to understand increases. And to think increases.
Yeah.
All of these, that's right.
I went to a liberal arts high school called Paradigm High School, and it was a life-changing experience for me. And we used this sort of seminar model where we would read books and then discuss them. And the discussions, I mean, if you haven't experienced that, that is one of the things that, it's one of the finer things in life, really. Being in a group of people who have all read the book and come prepared, and then throwing your ideas out there and your responses to the book,
right.
And then having, I mean, in kind of a gentle way, the ideas are being formed, and it's a kind of violent process. I mean, you're disagreeing and you're modifying and you're throwing this in and adding in your own experience to the mix, and what you come out feeling is edified. Just, I have gained something that I can't even put my finger on that is real. And after a couple of years of this, I noticed that I was thinking faster, clearer, more precisely. It changed everything.
My first exposure to this was working on my master's degree when I was teaching high school. This was back in the 90s, and early 90s. And I couldn't do it during the year, so I did it during my 3-month academic break.
Uh-huh.
I'd get up about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd study for a few hours.
You want to get this thing fired up again? There it is. And we're good.
Dude, I'm freezing.
Yeah. So the experience, you're teaching high school, you're doing your master's degree.
Right. Yeah, I had to do it during the academic break because it's the only time I had to do it. So I would get up about 5 o'clock in the morning and I would study for maybe 4 hours, right? And I'd take a little break here and there, and then I would go out in the garden and work in the garden. Now the sun's up, and I have my little notepad because that's where all the great ideas come, is when you're out there using your hands. And then I'd go back and read again, and this would go from about 5 in the morning till about 1 or 2 in the afternoon.
Okay.
And then family time. I did that for 3 months. Rocked my world.
Really?
I can't even tell you. And I would have a mentor who would call once a week. First question out of his mouth, this was Oliver DeMille, best mentor on the planet, right? He would say, "Did you do your readings?" And I would say, "Yeah, of course." And then one day I didn't, for whatever reason. He said, "Okay, well, I'll call you next week." Hung up. That was it.
Click. Done.
Click. Now, the way he had set this up was you had to pay in advance.
Oh.
So I'm out. It was $50 for a half an hour.
Which puts that responsibility on
Right
you
on me.
to own the
And I was
education.
so mad at him. Like, I was considering I'm done with this program, right?
Sure.
Within a couple of days, I'm like, oh, that's what he's trying to teach me. Never happened again.
It's that
ever.
Personal responsibility.
Yeah. But he's having me do all kinds of hard stuff, and it rocked my world. I had never exercised my noggin, my muscle up here like that ever in my life, and I was pushing 30 years old at that point.
Yeah.
Never been challenged that way, right? Changed my world, and I'm hooked on it. That's why we're here now. But,
And at that point, learning and growing and discussing become a way of life that you're
Right.
not going to
Right.
leave behind
Right.
lightly.
right. When people say, "Well, we don't want to discuss politics or intellectual," that's because you never have.
Yeah.
When you have enough, you can't not.
can't let it alone.
Because it's pertinent to life. It's pertinent to who you are, your mission, where you're going. It's significant, right? unless you've never done it, then you don't know what you're missing.
Yeah.
And you haven't paid the price to be able to engage in that, what the great books call the great conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea,
That's this idea that these principles, that the main idea is like this divide between liberty and security. I mean,
right.
there are positives in both, and the trade is hard, but the trouble is, it's a trade that you kind of only make in one direction.
Right.
And that's a trade that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And so, I mean, the debates are not new, and that's why the old books still have value.
Right, so when the kids read Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, right?
Sure.
We're having the same conversation that he was having back 300 BC,
Sure.
400 BC. And it really opens their minds. You know, what do these things actually mean? And we get down to word by word, you know, you never make it through all the readings, ever. Because you get bogged down into...
You mean in the discussion?
In the discussions,
when you're
right,
reading
right.
it, you're going
Yeah,
through it,
you're reading
right.
all the readings,
The,
but-
the discussion is going to pull from probably snippets here and there, or significant things, or whatever stood out to the people in the group.
Right.
And so you can have, 10 separate discussion groups on the same book, and they all go very differently.
Well, and what's interesting is, people come here acclimated to half an hour to 45 minutes of class time, discussion, whatever. Our discussions go as long as 3 hours without a break.
Sure.
Right? And how can you do that? Well, it's really tough in the beginning, but it's like the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Douglas went on for hours, up on a wagon, people standing around in the dirt street. Lincoln said, "You people have been here a long time. Why don't you go get dinner? Come on back." And then he went on for another 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
Right?
And people used to be able to do
Attention
that.
span.
So
We've lost it.
So the book American, I mean, using America as an example of shall we say, the decline and fall of the American attention span.
Right, okay, attention span.
Attention span, because it's an individual problem writ large, and societal problems are often individual problems that just have spread.
Right.
So one of the things that I find fascinating about that account is those are pretty normal people standing
right.
in the dirt,
Right.
listening
Right.
to two guys debating
Understanding.
politics, following this for 3 hours, going home, and then wanting it badly enough that they come back
Right.
for another 3.
And
that was normal.
that was normal.
And then the Federalist Papers, I mean, nowadays, I mean, that's this pretty impressive book if you read it, but that was written to the common man of the day.
It was
So the
these
idea
are newspaper articles.
Yeah.
Right.
This is what people
they
are reading.
Right. And we have our students read all 85 of them, plus another 85 what would be classified as anti-Federalist papers. So they get a real sense of this. What I'm finding is our students are the only ones out there in society that have actually read these.
Gosh.
And discussed them,
Yeah.
which is
Wouldn't that be
cool
nice
but sad.
if that spread? And that's one of the, I mean, that's, I guess, the dream of the college is to give that experience to more people.
Right.
So maybe this year, 15. I mean,
Right.
the class that you can admit, that we can admit, full disclosure at this point, I have actually signed a contract. I have accepted a teaching position here.
Yeah.
So this is not theoretical. I am interested personally in this model of education enough to move down here to the middle of nowhere with my family and dedicate the next couple of years to this.
Yeah. Awesome.
So here we go.
Awesome.
But yeah,
Did I hear a beeping?
yes, that was the GoPro. So we're fine.
Okay.
So I think we should probably wrap that up there. If you're interested in coming, the class size that we can admit this next year is pretty limited. I think maybe 15 students at the most,
max. Yeah.
at the absolute max. And so if you're interested, sign up quickly. But thank you so much for the interview,
Yeah.
and thank you for having me down here.
MonticelloCollege.org.
Link in the description below.
Yeah. And you can reach me or Joseph at you know how to reach him. My email is sb@monticellocollege.org.
And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.